The apartment door didn't slam. It sighed shut behind me, like it was ashamed of being part of this. No furniture, no curtains, just the hum of a fridge that smelled like it had survived a flood, and a light bulb swinging from a wire above my head like it was interrogating me. I had just turned 60. Spent my birthday eating cereal from the box on a plastic chair I borrowed from a neighbor, watching dust dance through the air like it belonged here more than I did. 2 months ago, I was married. 2 months ago, I had a home. An actual home with stone countertops I installed myself, bookshelves lined with things I read and things I lied about reading, and a wife who smiled for holiday cards like she hadn't already filed the paperwork. Now, 50 million in marital assets signed over to her with a smug little flip of her pen. No settlement. No lawyer who cared. Just a final handshake from hers, like he was thanking me for a generous donation to the Screw Yourself Fund. The lawyer called it a clean break. Like I was a horse with a broken leg. I didn't contest anything. No alimony, no plea for fairness. I just walked. And in walking, I landed here, in a third-floor walk-up with water damage that formed a suspicious-looking continent on the ceiling. A man could stare at it long enough to forget his name. I didn't drink. Not because I didn't want to, God, I wanted to, but because I couldn't afford even that. Not after the legal fees. Not after the oversights and clerical errors that magically placed every joint account, every titled asset, every fallback safety net into her name in the final hours. She had the lawyers, the accountants, the narrative. I had a paper trail of nothing. Except, in the back of my wallet, there was something, worn smooth from years of being sat on and ignored. A dark green card with no numbers on the front. Just a golden crest, faded from time. I pulled it out like it might scold me for still being alive. Her father had given it to me years ago, back when I was still someone worth introducing at company dinners. For emergencies, he'd said, clapping my shoulder with those heavy rings of his. If you ever need help, use this. No questions. That man was dead now, buried with a $10,000 watch and a family pretending he was ever warm. I remember staring at the card a long time that morning, wondering if this counted as an emergency. Then I looked around my prison cell of a kitchen where the only thing in the fridge was light and thought, yeah, this'll do. I dressed in the only blazer I didn't donate during the cleansing process and took the subway downtown, trying not to think about how many of the stops had ads for her company. Her smiling face plastered on billboards, pretending to care about urban revitalization, while she evicted tenants for luxury condos with wine cellars they'd never use. The bank was old money. Real old. Ornate pillars, stone floors that echoed too loud. You don't just walk into that kind of bank. You arrive. I stepped through the doors and instantly felt like a fraud. The suit didn't fit right. The shoes had a scuff I couldn't buff out with spit and memory. But I walked up to the front desk and handed over the card like it was a relic from a different war. The young teller looked at it, blinked, and said, "One moment, sir. Not can I see your ID? Not this card seems inactive." Just a pause. She disappeared into the back like she'd just been handed nuclear launch codes. Now, if you've made it this far and you're thinking, damn, this guy really got kicked to the curb, you're not wrong. But what happens next? That's the part people don't see coming. So if you're still here, if this story grabs you even half as much as the bank grabbed me, consider subscribing. Most folks listening don't, but it helps more than you think. And trust me, what's coming deserves to be heard. About 10 minutes passed. Then a man came out. Older, polished in a way that made you feel like lint. He smiled tightly, not like he was pleased to see me, more like he recognized a name he wasn't supposed to forget. "Mr. Ellery," he said quietly, "would you mind stepping into my office?" He didn't ask what I wanted. He didn't ask who I was. Just, "Please come with me." And something in his tone made me realize this wasn't just about money. Something had shifted. Something old, buried. And suddenly, I wasn't the man who lost everything. I was the man holding the one thing left that actually mattered. He didn't blink at the card. That was the first sign. Most bankers do something. Raise an eyebrow, tap the edge, glance at a screen like they're hoping for a reason to deny you. This one didn't even flinch. He just took the card, stared at it for a second too long, then gave me the kind of smile people use at funerals, tight-lipped and calculated. "This way, Mr. Ellery," he said, already turning. "No request for ID. No, what brings you in today?" Just straight to a discreet hallway that made the lobby look like a prop. I passed rooms with frosted glass and antique sconces and a silent man in a gray suit who stood like a statue at the end of the corridor. They led me into a small, soundproof office that smelled like expensive paper and older secrets. The door clicked shut behind us. The banker, His name tag read Grant Halvorson, Senior Private Manager, sat behind the desk and motioned for me to take the other chair. His fingers hovered over the keyboard like he was playing a piece he'd rehearsed but never performed. He typed something slowly, deliberately, not like he was searching, but confirming. I tried not to fidget, tried not to sweat through the one decent jacket I had left. Then he stopped, stared at the screen, and his whole face changed. It was subtle, just a moment, his eyes narrowing, the polite mask slipping like a curtain on a faulty rail. He looked at me, really looked, and his voice dropped low. "Sir, I'll need you to confirm something before I proceed." He turned the monitor slightly. "This card was assigned through a private mechanism initiated by Reginald A. Whitaker. That name mean anything to you?" I exhaled through my nose. "He was my father-in-law." He nodded once. "And you're no longer married to his daughter?" "Finalized 2 months ago." Something about that made his shoulders settle, like that was the missing puzzle piece. He tapped again, then pushed the monitor toward me. "This was flagged for escalation. Automatically. You need to see what's attached to this account." The screen loaded. I expected a 0, or maybe a note saying deactivated or closed. Hell, maybe even a message from beyond the grave telling me to get a job. What I didn't expect was the heading that read, Trust Instrument, Private Holding, Secondary Beneficiary, Edward J. Ellery. Under it, lines. Dozens of them. Legal clauses. Codes I barely understood. And then, status, activated. Trigger event, full dissolution of marital financial standing, claimant Edward J. Ellery. Value at trigger, $12.4 million. Current, real estate holdings adjusted quarterly. Additional notes, see Appendix C, voting rights in 2 LLC portfolios. I must have leaned back without realizing it. My head was suddenly buzzing like an old TV just flicked on. Halvorson didn't say anything, just watched me with the calm of someone trained to sit across from people who discover their lives are no longer what they thought. Is this active?" I asked. "It became active the moment your divorce finalized without equitable division. That was the dual trigger clause. Your name's on the structure, Mr. Ellery. Has been for 12 years. We've maintained it per the instructions of Mr. Whitaker's will and his state counsel." I looked at the paper trail again. My name, buried inside lines of trust documents like a signature waiting to be remembered. "Why?" I muttered. "Sir, why would he do this?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. "Why keep it secret?" Halvorson finally let out a slow breath, folded his hands. "There's a handwritten note in the physical file. I can have it retrieved if you'd like." I nodded like I was sleepwalking. While he made the call, I stared at the monitor again. 12 million. Not just money, assets. Ownership stakes. 2 companies I'd vaguely remembered hearing about in passing during my marriage. Always mentioned in the same breath as legacy projects or low liquidity investments. He'd parked them in a trust with my name and waited. Like he knew something was coming. Like he planned for her to cut me out. And now, that plan was live. Halvorson hung up the phone. "They're bringing the folder from vault storage. While we wait, you might want to consider legal representation. This puts you in a significant position, not just financially. Structurally, there are decisions that require attention." I barked a small laugh. "I came here hoping to afford groceries. Now you're talking about corporate votes." He gave a polite half-smile. "We get that more than you'd think." A quiet knock. An assistant stepped in with a leather file box and set it down gently like it was a baby. Halvorson opened it. Inside, papers yellowed at the edges, sealed envelopes, and at the very top, a small white note card. He slid it to me. On it, in that sharp, meticulous handwriting I remembered from holiday cards and birthday checks. "If she ever decides you're expendable, take this as my correction. R." No flourish. No explanation. Just a man who saw his daughter's ambition before she learned how to fake kindness. And in that moment, sitting in a windowless room surrounded by documents older than most marriages last, I realized something terrifying and powerful. I was no longer the man scraping for survival. I was the correction. The file felt heavier than it should have. Not in weight, but in gravity. Like every page I turned wasn't just revealing a document. It was unraveling something that had been coiled and waiting for years. Grant Halvorson sat across from me in silence, letting me flip through each sheet like I was discovering my own autopsy report. Except the corpse wasn't me. It was the illusion of power my ex-wife had spent years constructing. The trust was dated 12 years back. 12, which meant Reginald, her father, had seen something brewing before I ever did. A man doesn't create a hidden asset vehicle under his son-in-law's name on a whim. This wasn't a rainy day favor. It was a contingency plan. I found the clause quickly. It was highlighted with a tab labeled in neat handwriting. Clause 17B, Conditional Activation. It read, in the event that Edward J. Ellery becomes financially estranged from all joint marital holdings, the trust shall immediately activate under a dual trigger provision. Activation requires 1. Dissolution of marriage, and 2. Complete exclusion from shared financial assets or settlements. Upon activation, Edward J. Ellery shall assume full legal authority over the trust contents, including but not limited to real estate portfolios, cash reserves, and voting rights in attached entities. I stared at the text so long it began to blur. No mention of her. I asked, my voice flatter than I expected. Halvorson shook his head. This trust was structured independently of any marital or family estate. It's firewalled. If it had been listed in joint disclosures during the divorce, her legal team would have contested it. So why wasn't it? Because it was dormant, legally invisible. It only became active after the final divorce ruling confirmed your total exclusion from marital assets. I leaned back in the chair. Let that settle. She'd played chess with loaded dice. Used our shared years as leverage. Used her father's name, his companies, his old allies, as shields. She burned my life down with the precision of a seasoned arsonist, knowing there'd be no insurance check waiting for me on the other side. And yet, here I was, holding the matchbox her father had left in my back pocket. The part she didn't know he'd handed me. $12.4 million. And that wasn't even the real leverage. There were 2 corporate names listed in the trust appendices, Whitaker Urban Holdings and Iron Pike Properties LLC. Both names rang distant bells. She used to mention Whitaker as a legacy tail asset from her dad's empire, something not worth much until zoning laws shifted. And Iron Pike? That was a shell company used to manage commercial leasing portfolios. Only, the documents now said otherwise. Each company's equity structure was laid out in black and white. I held controlling interest, 51% and 53%, respectively. Combined, that gave me majority say in any vote, contract approval, or structural reorganization. The fine print was almost poetic. Mr. Ellery's authority is binding, with or without spousal consent, revocable only by mutual signature or legal death. I laughed once, dry and sharp. Legal death. The man really didn't trust his daughter. And now I knew why. Years ago, 5, maybe 6, I overheard Reginald and his daughter arguing in his study. It was muffled through the door, but I remember one line he said crystal clear. You can't treat people like checkboxes on your quarterly goals, Meredith. You don't get to erase loyalty just because it's quiet. She'd stormed out after that, and when I asked what it was about, she waved it off. Just Dad being dramatic. He wants everything to stay old school and sentimental. Sentimental, my ass. The man had been building a fallback plan. For me. Against her. I kept reading. The trust also included a letter from Reginald's estate manager, addressed to be opened by Edward Ellery only in the event of trust activation. It wasn't long, just 2 paragraphs and a list of 5 properties, including their leaseholders and current zoning statuses. The last line read, "You'll find that these properties intersect rather critically with her company's expansion plans. Use your discretion." I folded the paper once, slipped it back in the folder. The room had gone still, like the walls were waiting for me to breathe again. So what now? I finally asked. Halvorson folded his hands. That depends on how loud you want to be. You can assume your role quietly and simply collect. Or you can engage. Engage. There are executive board meetings scheduled quarterly for each of the holdings. As primary stakeholder, your presence, if requested, would initiate a shift in operational control. Staff, leases, development projects. Especially anything your ex-wife's firm is tied into. I stood up slowly. The kind of slow that says you're not dizzy, you're measuring the ground. I don't want revenge, I said. Halvorson didn't blink. That's good, because this isn't revenge. I looked him in the eye. No, it's reclamation. I left the bank that day walking slower than I ever had in my life. Not because I was tired, but because for the first time in weeks, every step had weight again. Purpose. I wasn't just a discarded husband anymore. I was a hidden stakeholder, a shadow made flesh, and I was starting to remember how it felt to matter. I didn't call her. I didn't send an email. I didn't fire off some triumphant, "Guess who's back?" text like some bitter ex with a newfound backbone. No, this wasn't about theatrics. It was about precision. And the one thing I'd learned in marriage, especially in that marriage, was that the moment you show your hand, you invite interference. She didn't just fight dirty. She fought preemptively. So I stayed silent, just long enough to start pulling at the seams. The trust documents listed a name, Harold M. Creed, senior partner, Whitaker Urban Holdings. A man I met once, in passing, over scotch and real estate lingo I barely followed. Back then, I was the husband. Now, I was the beneficiary holding 51%. I called his office directly. Got a real person, not a recording, not a receptionist pretending to screen. They asked who was calling, and when I said my name, the line went still for a moment. I'll let Mr. Creed know. Can you hold? 2 minutes later. He's free tomorrow at 11 a.m. Would you prefer to meet in person or remotely? In person. I showed up 5 minutes early. Creed's office hadn't changed, still filled with dusty blueprints and old maps of the city from decades past, framed like art. The receptionist barely made eye contact. But when I walked into the inner office, Creed stood before I'd even finished stepping through the door. Mr. Ellery. His voice was low, measured. His eyes scanned me, not in judgment, but in stunned recalibration. Well now, this is significant. I shook his hand. Firm. No performance, no apologies. He gestured to a chair. Sat opposite me. We thought you'd never come forward. I didn't know I could. He nodded slowly. If you do. That clause 17B, was like a trapdoor. Only opens under certain conditions. Once you're in, you're in. No reversal. I'm assuming you verified activation? Yes. Halvorsen sent the authorization confirmation. We've received instructions to initiate transition protocol. Your signature alone will suffice. He pushed a leather-bound folio across the desk. Inside, a transition document assigning executive rights, board visibility, and voting access. No ceremony, just ink and intent. I signed. And just like that, 12 years of dormancy ended in 12 seconds of pen on paper. Creed leaned back. We'll quietly insert you into the next quarterly meetings. Given your equity position, you'll receive all prep materials, voting dockets, and profit/loss sheets starting this week. No one else has been alerted yet. Good. I prefer it that way. He chuckled once. You sound like your father-in-law. I didn't reply. I never knew whether that was meant as a compliment or a warning. Over the next few days, emails began trickling in. First from Whitaker's internal teams, legal, operations, finance. All formal, all structured around the idea that I was no longer a name on paper, but an active participant. They used phrases like, as per your rights, and your oversight authority. I didn't answer most. I didn't need to. My presence alone was enough to stir the pond. By Thursday, I was looped into Iron Pike's back-end portal, where I could see leasing data, payment flows, and expansion plans across 5 major metro sites, including one that was currently under preliminary negotiation with, of course, my ex-wife's newest project firm. She didn't know it yet, but one of her cornerstone deals was now going through a company I controlled. Technically, she was pitching a land use contract to me. There was a strange numbness in those early hours. I didn't feel victorious. Didn't feel bitter either. Just functional. Like a machine quietly rebooting after a long shutdown. At night, I'd sit in that same miserable apartment, still reeking faintly of old onions and someone else's regrets, reading zoning maps by lamplight. I didn't tell anyone. Not old friends. Not even the neighbor who let me borrow his Wi-Fi. I wanted no noise. No rumors. Because this wasn't a comeback tour, it was a silent insertion. And silence had power. The first board meeting came via video call. They didn't recognize my face at first. One by one, the windows loaded. Executives, partners, legal reps. All with polished smiles and guarded tones. Then someone noticed the new participant window. E. Ellery, majority holder. The air changed. Creed began the meeting. Introduced me with no fanfare. Mr. Ellery has assumed active position per Trust Clause 17B. All decisions moving forward will include his vote. He is to receive the full brief moving forward. A couple of faces froze mid-nod. One cleared his throat and said, I thought he was no longer affiliated. He is now, Creed replied. I didn't speak during the call. Just watched. Listened. Took notes. The silence made them nervous. And that suited me just fine. Because noise demands a reaction. But silence leaves room for calculation. And I was just getting started. Most people think power looks like shouting in a boardroom or storming into someone's office with a threat. But power, real power, sits quiet. It's in the invisible threads that hold up someone else's world. The ones they forget exist until you pluck one, and everything starts to shake. That's what I discovered 2 weeks after activating the trust. I was combing through Iron Pike's lease portfolio. Not out of curiosity, diligence. I treated it like checking the oil on a car someone else had been driving without permission for years. And there it was. A cluster of commercial properties leased by an entity called Horizon Blue Design Group, LLC. Her company. Of course, she'd changed the name. When her father died, she spent the next 2 years rebranding every legacy holding to sound more modern, more chic, more impact-driven. Gone were the old brick-and-mortar titles. In came all these sleek, consultant-flavored brands with logos that looked like skincare companies. But the legal filings couldn't hide the lineage. Horizon Blue was Meredith. Her signature was on the articles of formation. Iron Pike, my company now, held 8 properties leased directly to her firm. And not just boutique shops or gallery spaces. These were anchor locations. A logistics hub on 12th Street. 2 retail corners in development zones. One site, I noticed, was listed as awaiting permit resolution, but the files were 3 years old. Someone had been sitting on it. Deliberately. So I called the internal compliance officer. A young guy named Jared who clearly thought I was some relic from a forgotten vault. I told him I wanted a full performance clause audit on all Horizon Blue leases. He blinked for a moment, then asked if I had a legal reason. I smiled. Due diligence. He hesitated. You sure? That'll flag them. I'm aware. I hung up, then went back to reading. The performance clauses were old, but airtight. Reginald had drafted most of them before zoning laws were gutted by loophole artists. They included minimum revenue thresholds, maintenance obligations, even community outreach benchmarks. If a tenant failed to meet them, even if they were still paying rent, the lessor had the right to initiate a tiered review, and in some cases, terminate or reprice the lease. Meredith had never expected anyone to look at those again. She assumed the companies were dormant, owned by silent partners, or folded into holding firms with no incentive to touch her deals. After all, that's what she did with old contracts, buried them under new logos and friendlier fonts. 3 days after the audit request, Jared called back. Sir, there are some things here you're going to want to see. He emailed over the report. I read it slowly, savoring each line like a man rediscovering his taste buds. Violations in 3 properties. One had missed its revenue trigger for 6 consecutive quarters. Another had sublet space, illegally. A third, the most critical, had never submitted the community compliance form, which wouldn't have mattered, if not for the fact that the construction permits for the adjacent development required those filings to stay valid. In short, she'd been expanding with phantom compliance. No lies, just neglect. And now, I was the one holding the scorecard. I didn't call her, didn't gloat. I simply forwarded the reports to Iron Pike Legal and marked them for board review. A week later, Horizon Blue received formal notices of review. Standard protocol. Nothing aggressive. No threats. Just the soft knock of reality. By Thursday, I got an email from a leasing agent at her firm. Polite, desperate. We're hoping to clarify some of the recent inquiries from Iron Pike. We believe these to be clerical oversights and would welcome a meeting to resolve. I didn't respond. Jared sent a follow-up. Should we initiate the escalation procedures? Not yet, I replied. Let's give them time to do the right thing. I wasn't trying to destroy her. Not yet. That would have been easy. But easy was loud. And loud gets attention. I didn't want to fight. I wanted gravity. The kind that bends orbits and makes people fall without realizing they're falling. Besides, there was something deeply satisfying about it. Knowing that while she was likely in some conference room, snapping at interns and spinning stories for her COO, the real damage was already inside the walls. Silent. Documented. Legal. I started scanning other tenants. Not just hers. Anyone tied to her expansion partners. Clients. Vendors. People she leaned on. The web was bigger than I expected. Reginald hadn't just handed me a trust. He'd handed me the architecture beneath her castle. And now, all I had to do was tighten a thread. One at a time. It started the way all good collapses do, quietly. A missed email here. A delayed permit there. At first, she blamed her new assistant. The girl was fresh out of a second-tier MBA program, more obsessed with color-coded calendar invites than actual deliverables. Meredith snapped at her in the middle of a strategy meeting when the quarterly lease report wasn't uploaded on time. Fix it. And next time, use your brain instead of your highlighters. No one in the room said a word. She moved on. Didn't think twice about the permit delay for the Fremont District build-out. Bureaucracy's slower in Q4, her VP said. Then another hiccup. The revolving credit line she used for Horizon Blue's operating capital suddenly flagged. A freeze. Ownership query was all the bank disclosed. She fired off a message to her private banker, demanding clarification. He replied 3 hours later. Cryptic, unusually cautious. We're reviewing a filing discrepancy regarding associated property leases. Nothing major. Should be resolved soon. She didn't like that. Not the wording, not the tone. By the end of the day, her COO knocked on her office door. Not the usual light tap, but 3 measured knocks like a man walking into a minefield. Got a minute? He asked. I barely have 5 seconds, she snapped, eyes still on her screen. Somebody's poking around the old contracts, he said anyway. Compliance reviews. Audits on a few of the leases we restructured 5 years ago. She looked up, blinked once. Internal. No. External. Iron Pike Properties sent notices on 3 of our locations. I thought they were just holding companies. They are, she said. Ghost shells. No active oversight. Well, somebody lit the ghosts up. She was on her feet before he finished the sentence. Get me legal, she said, already dialing. And call Adrian at zoning. I want to know why our permit's still sitting on someone's desk. The COO hesitated. There's one more thing. The name tied to the new trustee access at Iron Pike. She stopped. It's Ellery. Her chest tightened. Not panic. Not yet. But that cold bite of something she hadn't felt since her father's funeral. Vulnerability. Edward Ellery? She asked slowly. The COO nodded. It was buried under some old trust instrument. Legal says it might be legitimate. She didn't respond. Just stared at the glass wall of her office where her reflection stared back. Flawless makeup, perfect posture, a woman in command of everything except the past. Leave me, she muttered. He left. She closed the door, sat at her desk, picked up her phone, and called her lawyer directly. It rang once. Meredith, the man answered, cheerful. What can I do? Find out if Edward's behind this. A pause. Define this. Compliance reviews. Permits. Contract audits. And he's listed on Iron Pike's filings now? What the hell is going on? I'll look into it. Do more than that, she hissed. I want to know everything. If he's active. If he's moving funds. If he's talking to anyone in city zoning or banking. I don't care if you have to subpoena a damn coffee filter. Find it. She hung up without waiting for confirmation. Her eyes flicked to the corner of her desk where a framed photo used to sit. Her father, stoic, hand resting on her shoulder like he was knighting her instead of warning her. She'd taken it down months ago, said it didn't match the rebrand. Now, she felt the absence like a hole in the floor. She opened her laptop and typed Iron Pike Properties trustee information into the private registry portal. The name loaded. Edward J. Ellery. Majority stakeholder. Activated 17B clause. Clause 17B. She knew that clause. Her father never discussed it. Never explained it. But she remembered the number. She remembered the night he locked his study door, demanded the housekeeper leave, and spent 2 hours reading through something in a manila folder. She tried to peek once. He slammed the drawer shut. Privacy, he barked. At the time, she thought it had to do with the city redevelopment contracts. Now she wasn't so sure. Her phone buzzed. A text from her CFO. Just got word. Our permit for Fremont is now pending secondary review. Timeline unknown. She didn't reply, just stared at the screen, lips pressed so tightly together the color drained from them. Her empire wasn't cracking. It was being examined. She closed her laptop. Reached for a cigarette. She didn't smoke anymore. And for the first time in years, Meredith Whitaker felt something unfamiliar slither in under her ribcage. Doubt. She walked into the bank like she still owned the damn place. That's how Meredith operated. Heels clicking like warning shots, assistants flanking her like legal muscle, sunglasses left on just long enough to make the entire lobby feel like they were beneath her gaze. She didn't do appointments. She didn't do reception desks. She walked straight to the marble counter, leaned in, and dropped her name like it was an indictment. I need to speak to Grant Halvorson. Now. The teller, young, polite, and visibly uncomfortable, hesitated. Do you have an appointment, ma'am? Her smile was frost. No, but he'll make time. Less than 2 minutes later, Halvorson appeared from the executive corridor. Crisp suit, clipboard in hand. The same impenetrable calm he was known for when delivering trust updates to billionaires and inheritance vultures. He paused when he saw her. The tension in his shoulders was microscopic, but Meredith caught it. They both knew why she was here. He led her into a discreet conference room without saying a word. Closed the door. Pulled out a chair she didn't take. I need to know, she began, voice sharp as a snapped wire. If the Ellery Trust is active. Halvorson didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. Just gently placed his clipboard on the table and clasped his hands in front of him. I'm afraid I can't confirm or deny the status of any client trust. You can't what? She spat. He repeated, slower. I cannot confirm or deny the status of any client trust. I'm not a stranger. I'm the daughter of Reginald Whitaker, the Reginald Whitaker. That trust, if it exists, would have been under his estate. I am his heir. With respect, Ms. Whitaker, Halvorson said, tone calm. Your father established several protected instruments under specific confidentiality clauses, one of which, Clause 17b, explicitly prohibits disclosure to any party not directly named within the instrument, regardless of relation. You're hiding behind technicalities, she snapped. I will have my legal team file a discovery order by noon. You're welcome to pursue legal options, he replied, and then slid a plain white card across the table. This is the direct line to our trust compliance liaison. Should you wish to file a formal request, it must be submitted through counsel. However, I'll save you the time. The clause you're referring to was privately initiated, sealed, and backed by a judicial protection ruling in 2013. She stared at the card. Didn't touch it. That was the year after his first stroke, she said coldly. Are you suggesting he had the presence of mind to structure an airtight instrument from his hospital bed? Halvorson's face didn't move. Yes. In fact, he did. He met with us personally, over the course of 3 days, and signed the final version in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary. It was filed directly into Vault documentation and never digitally replicated. Which means, he added, his voice still painfully polite, there is no electronic trail for you to subpoena. Her breath caught. There it was. That one small confirmation he hadn't even meant to give. It existed, and it was locked beyond her reach. Is this about punishing me? She whispered, more to herself than to him. Halvorson stood, smoothed his jacket. This bank has no position on personal matters, Ms. Whitaker. We merely execute the legal intent of our clients. In this case, your father's. I'm sorry I can't be of more help. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just stood, collected the card without looking at it, and walked out as if the floor beneath her was suddenly uncertain. In the parking lot, she collapsed into the driver's seat of her Mercedes. The leather felt colder than it should have. Her hands shook slightly on the steering wheel, not from rage. Meredith was used to rage. She thrived on it. This was different. This was fear. Because she finally understood, this wasn't Edward throwing a tantrum. This wasn't some pathetic ex clawing for relevance. This was designed. A long game written by the only man who'd ever truly known how she operated. Her father hadn't trusted her. And instead of confronting her in life, he'd buried the bullet in a trust and let her ex-husband pull the trigger years later. She looked down at the card in her lap. No title, just a name. And a number. That's when she realized something that made her throat close. Reginald hadn't left her a fortune. He'd left her a warning. And she'd ignored it. She was in the middle of a brand meeting when her phone buzzed. Twice, then stopped. She glanced down, saw a missed call from an unknown number, then a voicemail notification. Ignored it. Her team was presenting the mock-ups for the upcoming gala, the charity event she'd strategically tied to her downtown property launch. The logos were clean. The theme was legacy through renewal. She liked the irony. 20 minutes later, as the room cleared, her assistant reappeared at the door. There's a tenant on line 2. From the Delavan property. He asked to speak with you directly. Meredith sighed. She never dealt with tenants. That's what regional managers were for. But something in the assistant's face, hesitation, confusion, made her wave him in. She picked up the line. This is Meredith Whitaker. The voice on the other end was casual. Southern, maybe. Ms. Whitaker, good afternoon. This is Lionel Hayes. I run the wine shop on the corner lot of the Delavan complex. Been leasing from your group about 7 years now. Yes, Mr. Hayes, how can I help? Well, he said, I just wanted to confirm. Your team sent someone new over yesterday. Said he was reviewing lease renewals on behalf of the holding company. Seemed nice. Real polite. Older gentleman. Wore a gray blazer. Said his name was a pause. Edward Ellery. She didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stared at the wall behind her desk like it had suddenly sprouted teeth. Hayes filled the silence. I figured, maybe he was with your legal group or something. He didn't ask for money or cause any trouble. Just said he was reviewing obligations and tenant satisfaction. She forced her voice out. He didn't take anything? Ask you to sign anything? No, ma'am. Just took notes. Asked questions. Seemed like he knew the property well. She thanked him, ended the call, and sat very still. Her name was no longer his. He dropped it during the divorce. No fight, no drama. Just signed the papers and left the moniker behind like a coat he didn't want anymore. But now, he'd used it. He'd said it to a tenant. Out loud. Casually. And that's what froze her. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't sabotaging. He was reappearing, quietly, methodically, in all the places she had long since assumed were hers. Not just assets. Spaces. Rooms. Contracts. Relationships she thought had faded with time. He was asserting. She opened her calendar. Scanned through the properties they were planning to showcase in Q1. Delavan was one of 5 tied to Iron Pike. She checked the others. Each had tenants. Each had leases up for renewal within 6 months. Her inbox pinged. An automated update from Iron Pike. Stakeholder meeting agenda finalized. Mr. Ellery to chair the leasing review portion. She stared at it. No subject line. No warning. Just cold process. Routine. He was inside the system now. Not clawing at the gates. Sitting in the inner rooms. Reading the minutes. Turning pages she didn't even know were still being written. She reached for her assistant's intercom. Clear my next 2 hours. But you have. I said clear it. She leaned back, mind racing. Rage building like steam in a sealed pipe. But the feeling that followed was worse. The one she couldn't shake. She wasn't dealing with a man trying to hurt her. She was dealing with a man restoring his shape in a world she'd worked very hard to convince herself he no longer belonged to. And now, she didn't know which parts were still hers, or if any of them ever truly were. The envelope was thick, heavy, not in mass, but in implication. Cream-colored with a red seal, the kind of legal paper you don't toss on a desk. Meredith's lawyer held it like it was radioactive. She knew that expression. He wore it every time he came bearing truths he couldn't spin. They were in her office, high above the city, the skyline laid out beneath her like a war map. She'd always liked that view. It made everything feel distant, manageable. But today, it just made her feel exposed. What is it? She asked without looking up from her screen. Her lawyer set it down. It's from Ellery. She stopped typing, took her time, then slowly, deliberately, closed her laptop. You said he had no standing. At the time, he didn't. Now it seems he does. And he's using it. She opened the envelope. The paper inside was crisp, freshly printed, unhurried in its composition. No dramatic letterhead. No inflammatory language. Just clean, devastating precision. Subject: reconciliation of dividends and holdings. Whitaker Urban Holdings and Iron Pike Properties. She read. Paragraph after paragraph, he outlined his rights as majority stakeholder in 2 LLCs, detailed the dividend distributions that had not been honored since the date of trust activation, provided line-item breakdowns of profits siphoned through shell vendors, performance bonuses paid from shared earnings, and lease adjustments benefiting only one side of the enterprise, hers. Then came the phrase that made her stomach twist. These misallocations appear to have occurred during a time in which I held legal authority, unbeknownst to me at the time, but valid under Clause 17B of the trust. I am requesting a joint reconciliation within 14 business days. If unresolved, this matter will proceed to external resolution, as permitted by corporate code and partnership doctrine. No anger, no accusations, just inevitability. He wasn't accusing her of theft. He was offering her the chance to confess to it, on paper. The final line. This is not punitive. This is a restoration. I trust you will honor what was always intended. She folded the letter. Perfectly. Deliberately. Then slid it back into the envelope and stared out the window. Behind her, her lawyer cleared his throat. We can argue some of the dividend timing. But the contracts he's referencing? They're airtight. Your father left no ambiguity. If this goes public. I know, she said flatly. Her voice was so soft it startled even her. She looked out at the glass and steel jungle she used to conquer daily. The same skyline where, just months ago, she'd toasted deals and hosted rooftop fundraisers with the casual cruelty of a woman who had already forgotten what she'd built on borrowed stone. But now the stone was speaking. She remembered her father once saying, if you build over a foundation you don't own, someday the ground will ask for rent. She thought he was being poetic. She hadn't realized he meant it literally. Edward hadn't screamed. He hadn't posted cryptic jabs on social media. He hadn't hired PR to assassinate her in the press. He'd simply returned. Through paper. Through clauses. Through silence so loud it dismantled her credibility with a whisper. Her assistant knocked softly. Should I hold your afternoon? The developers from Calvert are downstairs. She didn't answer. Just waved her off. Eyes still locked on the horizon. Because she knew what was coming. The developers would hesitate. The CFO would start backing up files. The auditors would call. The press wouldn't need a scandal, just a whiff of instability. And when they finally asked why Meredith Whitaker was suddenly so quiet, The answer would be simple. Because Edward hadn't come for revenge. He'd come to restore balance. And there's nothing louder than a man who wins by simply showing up to claim what was already his. The chandeliers sparkled like they were mocking her. Overhead, strings played a tired arrangement of something expensive and forgettable. Waiters moved through the crowd with robotic precision, handing out glasses of wine no one drank and bite-sized canapes no one remembered tasting. Meredith stood at the edge of the stage, smiling like her teeth were made of porcelain. The charity gala was her idea. Of course it was. She had built an entire reputation on social grace under pressure, philanthropy as strategy. And tonight was supposed to be her reset, her rebrand. A celebration of renewal and resilience, as the marketing team had put it, blissfully unaware of how much she now hated both words. She wore white. Always white. A subtle power play. Untouchable. Ethereal. But tonight, the gown felt heavy, like it knew too much. The whispers started before the salad was cleared. Not loud, not dramatic. Just motion. Two guests huddled too long over a phone screen. A glance from a councilwoman who'd always been loyal. A soft apology from one of the larger leasing partners. We're reevaluating our investment in the Midtown corridor. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. Her CFO hadn't shown up. That wasn't a surprise. He'd submitted his resignation the night before via encrypted PDF. No subject line, just 3 clipped paragraphs and a footer that read, effective immediately. And still, Meredith smiled. She stepped onto the stage when the MC cued her. The lights hit her like judgment. She looked out into the crowd and delivered a speech she'd practiced for weeks. It was flawless. No stutters, no tells. She spoke of legacy, of building for the next generation, of honoring those who came before. Not once did her voice crack. Not once did her hand tremble. But she saw him. He stood near the back wall. No spotlight, no audience. Dressed in a simple black suit that still somehow fit him better than anything her stylists ever put on her. Edward. Silent. Still. He didn't move. Didn't nod. Didn't even smirk. Just watched. Like he wasn't there to gloat, but to witness. And that was worse. Because if he had come to celebrate his victory, she could have dismissed it as petty. But he hadn't. He wasn't basking in anything. He was closing a chapter. Without needing to say a word. Her mind looped the last line of that cursed trust again. The one her father had written by hand and sealed away like a trapdoor under the floor of her empire. Should she ever sever you unjustly, take back only what was always yours. Not more. Not vengeance. Just what was always yours. That line, she now understood, wasn't just a clause. It was a prophecy, and tonight was its fulfillment. After the speech, she returned to her table, posed for a photo, signed a check. She did it all with grace. With perfection. As expected. But she knew. Tomorrow, the papers would announce the pullout of 3 major partners. The zoning board would quietly reassess her Midtown license. Her COO would start forwarding calls instead of answering them. Developers would pause funding. Investors would schedule routine check-ins that weren't routine. And all of it would happen without Edward lifting a finger. Because he already had. Weeks ago, she had just been too busy curating her next headline to see the ice forming beneath her. And now, the empire was frozen. Still standing, but hollow. Cracking beneath the surface. Waiting for the next thaw to reveal the rot. He left before dessert. No goodbyes. No final glance. Just slipped out the side door like a man who didn't need to be seen. She watched from the balcony above, clutching her champagne like a life vest. And for the first time in her career, Meredith Whittaker didn't wonder what to say next. She just stood there, and finally felt what it was like. To lose. Quietly. Completely. Irrevocably.